Or you guys are live.
Oh, okay. Welcome back to A Dose of CoCo. I've got my girl Amenah here today. Just super excited for this episode. It's more of just a continuation of a little bit about me and kind of what really motivated me to start this podcast and actually move forward with it. It had been in my thoughts for quite some time, and so I'm just really excited to have her here today. Amenah and I met through a mutual friend, our girl, if you remember on the first episode where I talk a little bit more about myself, the black girl that we both wore colored contacts and dyed our hair blonde in high school. That is our mutual friend. And then our friendship really grew stemming from the 2020 uprising in Minneapolis. So we did a ton of protesting, walking, thinking, healing. From there, we started doing like the healing circles, and we really learned more about each other and like our past traumas, some family history, and just we really started to, like, our friendship really grew from that and just learning more about each other and just on a deeper level. So I'm excited to have you here. You're really kind of like that friend that just straightforward, no BS, but always supportive, always motivating, and just kind of level-headed. And so I'm super happy that like our friendship has flourished since then, and really wanted to have her here as kind of the person to guide you guys on understanding me a little bit more, and truly like how I got here and what is the passion behind A Dose of CoCo. Again, I said it's not going to just be about dating and trauma. It's really about everything. So life, healing, dating. We're going to laugh. We're going to cry. We're going to talk. We're going to heal. We're going to talk about kids. Timeouts with kids. Birthday celebrations, girls trips, all that jazz. And so, yeah, I'm excited to have Amenah here.
Yes, I'm excited to be here and participate in your podcast.
Yay.
And I enjoyed your first episode of A Dose of CoCo.
I am so hard on myself, and she is the one person that I always send it to, and I'm like, really? You thought it was good? She's like, you're being too hard on yourself. Like, just, and so I'm excited to have you here. She's also a mom. She's married, a mom of two cute little girls, and one of them is just a little bit more dear to my heart because she's got my spunky, crazy personality.
She definitely has that.
Yeah. I'm super excited to have you here. So, yeah.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here and dive in. And yeah, you talked a little bit about how we know each other and how we really connected summer of 2020 with...
That was crazy.
Yeah, the healing circles with Creative Caponia. Shout out to them because it was very insightful and gave that safe space for us to just explore how we were kind of feeling through that time, and really, right, the safe space for Black people to be able to kind of express, and more of like letting us talk about how we were feeling and express our feelings, and more not it be so much centered on them.
Yeah, we did have a couple Karens.
We did have a couple Karens.
It was a safe space, but we did have some Karens that we were like, hold up.
Yeah, I had to let them know.
This is not, no, that's not what we're doing. So that was a good summer, a crazy summer, but a very eye-opening. And I think it was awful, like the purpose of, or the trigger for that summer being so chaotic. But ultimately, I think a lot of us got some healing and just eye-openings to the racial disparities that we already knew were in Minneapolis, Minnesota, but it was like at the forefront, probably more than likely because the world was at a standstill with the pandemic. So
yeah, definitely. And I think it too just gave that almost that all the things that we kind of suppressed, right, and gave that finally we can talk about it out loud. Because I think it was like even a lot of the things that we've been friends for years with your girlfriends, and just things that you just never talked about.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of interesting because I think I had me and our mutual friend have been friends forever, and we never really kind of talked about
race and
yeah, or just like, you know, the microaggressions and like the subtle things that would happen, right? We just never talked about it, right?
Yeah.
Friends talked about a lot of things, but never that. So it just kind of opened up that.
Yeah, I learned a lot about her that summer and her racial insecurities, which is so crazy as like, you know, she understood from my end like a dark skinned girl's perspective to a light skinned black girl's perspective. And, you know, it was, and we just had just different opinions of each other growing up. And it was, yeah, so that was
When,
good.
how long you guys had been friends and never talked about
yeah.
it?
Yeah.
It just never came up. So I think it took all of our friendships just to like a just different, deeper level.
Yeah.
And just kind of, right, unlocked a lot of things. But I think it was a good opportunity, right? And our friendship grew from it, and our friendships with many other people as well. So I think that was a good time.
Yeah.
As good as it
Especially
could be.
learning about like, you know, traumas with our fathers and how that kind of segues into my dating and, you know, and so, yeah.
Yeah, well, we should unpack that.
Let's unpack it.
Because I know, right, in some of your first episode of your podcast, you kind of talked a little bit about how you felt like you kind of rushed into your relationship kind of with your husband. And I was curious kind of about what do you think drove you outside of the things that you talked about, which was all of your friends around you were starting to get married and have kids, and you felt that level of pressure, and then you just kind of rushed into that marriage and realized, you know, years later that potentially it wasn't right. But have you kind of reflected on what you think drove you, or what are things about your husband that you looked for that maybe you hadn't had from your childhood or things like that?
Yeah, I think looking back, like, and I've unpacked this a lot through therapy, and I think to some degree I was like, oh, this, not to say that it was, you know, it's right, but for me, I was like, maybe all these bad things are happening because of like karma, right?
Karma.
Yeah, and not, like, that's just me being me, and you know, not punishing myself for being like, maybe I deserve this because I married him, you know, knowing that he wasn't the one. But the biggest thing for me that I've learned over the course of the past 10 or so years is it was a safety thing. He was safe. He was opposite from my father, and I knew that I felt like he, you know, like he would never cheat on me. He would never be physically abusive, financially abusive. And I think to some degree it's like there was immaturity on my part, right? And so when you talk about, or when I spoke about everyone around me, and like that was the height of social media, like it was coming in full force, and everyone around me was getting married and having kids, and I was just like, well, what's going on with me? You know, like you see the memes, like everybody in their 20s is doing this, and you know, and I'm just getting drunk or traveling and things like that. The biggest thing for me was probably safety and knowing like, okay, it's time to settle down. Like maybe that's the age of settling down, and so you settle. I settled, and I didn't know what true love was. I didn't witness true love. I didn't witness like a healthy relationship, and so I looked for everything that I knew to be the opposite of what I had witnessed, but without going to therapy and truly acknowledging, right, and being able to discern, like, okay, what do you want, and being able to unpack like what my childhood was like. I went for what I thought to be safe, and that was him. And so yeah,
That's interesting. That's funny that you felt like, I felt the opposite of that. Like 26 to me seems young to be wanting to get married and have kids, and I think I was the opposite. Like I knew I was not going to get married or any of that in my 20s.
I think in my head, like, I don't know. I did a lot of therapy and a lot of work, and obviously, like, I love my kids. I love, like, my life right now, and I wouldn't change it for the world.
Yeah.
But at that time, my mom had me when she was 20.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so at 26, 27, she was already a mother of 3. And so it was kind of just like, is my life slowing down? Like, what am I doing? Everybody else is doing this. And so do I have to, get on that train as well? And so, yeah, I think everybody needs to get in therapy ASAP, because a lot of your early on challenges throughout life, post, college, whatever, it will really kind of change the course of your life. Like, I look at some of the kids now that take, their gap years.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God. Like, that's really amazing. Even if you're going across country, you're traveling to Europe or Africa or wherever you're going, like, there's just so many experiences that change your perspective on life that I wish that I had at that time, because I think that I would have been more knowledgeable or mature and been able to kind of be confident and comfortable within myself at that point. And I think that's a big piece of, like, my growth and healing right now, is like learning to be confident and comfortable within myself at 41 years old.
Girl, it is definitely a process.
It's a continuing process.
I always believe everything happens for a reason, right? Yeah. And so your course of what you were supposed to do, and you were supposed to have those beautiful babies with that man, and that's just, how everything goes. But it's just kind of interesting, just kind of our opposite perspective on it, that I knew I wasn't, like, ever gonna be. I probably didn't even think I was ever gonna get married or have kids. Like, that was never my goal, or I never saw that. Like, I was never a kid that thought about being married and weddings or, like, any of that stuff.
No, like when I look back at my childhood, I can't necessarily say, like, I would play with Barbies and be like, oh, I'm gonna have 3 kids, 4 kids. And I think there was some sort of shift when I left Detroit and moved to Wayzata. It's like that suburban mindset that I think, like, I don't want to be, like, drastic, but, like, infiltrated my brain and, like, how I saw life and what I saw life looking like. So I think apart for you, right, you grew up in the city.
Yeah.
And so for me, moving from the city to the suburbs, whole nother state, predominantly white, like, my life took a big shift, and that was like a decade chunk out of my life that really changed my trajectory. So
no, it makes sense, right? Because it is the picture, right, of the suburban lifestyle of, like, the married, and you have 2.5 kids, which that means your dog and all of that, right? This big, beautiful house and all that. So that makes sense. Yeah. That's really interesting. And mine being the opposite, right? I was in the city, and I think most of my friends probably were single parent households outside of, because, I lived in South Minneapolis, but I went to Washburn, which was like 50th and Nicollet, but that was closer to like the suburbs area, and when you get kind of closer to Edina. So that's where you had half kind of the city kids and half the kind of Edina kids, and it was either probably single parent households or predominantly wealthy. And the moms stayed at home, and then the dads worked, and housekeepers,
and the kids drove these nice brand new cars. Yeah.
So that was kind of what my reality was, kind of growing up in high school, and it was I know it's very different than being in the suburbs. Yeah. Huh, that's interesting. Well, that probably can go. I know, I was like looking at to edit that one out. I was like, what's our transitions into patterns? Meaning. Gosh, so do you think were there some patterns from even the things that you looked for in your husband who you had married to the people who you started to date after your husband? Like, was it?
Like similarities? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Complete opposite.
Complete opposite.
Complete
And you think that was
opposite.
because of you saw some things possibly in your husband that you wanted to shy away from, and then in the next person that you looked for, you wanted, I guess let's go the opposite of stability being
Pure chaos,
Chaos.
lies, deceit, like everything. No, I think it was honestly like I wanted a little bit more of like my personality. And so I think that my ex-husband is a great person, great father, but ultimately he was not my person. And so when I started doing the work and doing the therapy, I wanted a partner that was engaging, that was exciting, that was travel, they had travel experience. They wanted to travel. They were fun. They were funny. They had more personality. And I think, gosh, I don't know. That's a good question. Like, no similarities at all. Complete opposite. And I think for me, like, I was doing a lot of the work to heal myself and to rid myself of, like, this idea that I needed to be with somebody because they were safe and not necessarily making my life better. But I wanted true love. Like, I wanted excitement. I wanted stability, but I wanted, like, a best friend. I wanted a person that I would miss if I went on a girls' trip or like, I wanted the exact opposite of what I had experienced in my marriage. So if that makes sense, yeah.
No, that does make sense. And I know in probably some of your future episodes, you're probably going to unpack the different things with your exes, but it makes me think of a question I have of, like, availability. Like, right, your husband, right, is there, right, really attentive, available, right? You
That's
kind of know.
Also a pattern. If you want to connect exes, is emotionally, they lacked emotional maturity. And in some ways, like, emotional intelligence.
Do you think that's a pattern throughout, even from your ex-husband to the different
Emotional
partners that you've had?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I suppose that's a pattern.
That's a pattern.
You're drawn to men
You drew it out.
who are
drew it out of
not
me.
possibly,
Yes.
right, emotional. Which it takes time, right?
Whereas
Women
for me,
mature faster than men.
I think, I know this about myself. I don't want to say I think, like, I am an enabler. And so I'm a problem solver. And all of my relationships, I have kind of been that person to step in and try to fix things. Right? So you need to go to therapy. Let me get online. Find 15 therapists for you to connect with. You are lacking in some capacity. Like, how do I fix your situation to make your life better? Because ultimately, I feel like if I can fix this one situation, it's going to better our relationship, and then at some point, like, I benefit from that, which is not okay for me. It's not right, and so I'm working on that. Like, I think, and this isn't even just like in romantic relationships, it's family. Like, how do I make your life better? So I've got to stop doing that, and I've got to stop trying to be a fixer. Yeah.
That makes sense. Because, I mean, that makes you almost take on too much.
I take on a lot, yeah. And so I'm trying to pull back from that. I'm being very intentional of not always having to be the person that fixes situations. And so, yeah.
Yeah, which I know, especially with partners, right? Because, I mean, the whole thing of a partnership, right, is supposed to be kind of 50-50.
Yeah.
And not, right, this imbalance. And you can't save somebody from themselves either, right? Like, just because all you can do, right, is control yourself, which we all need to learn. I'm always one of those, right? Like, I can give it out.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that I kind of do the same things, right?
Yeah.
But I feel like I'm big, especially with having kids.
Yeah.
Women, we tend to try to take on too much.
Yeah.
Right? And like our kids, and then it takes time away from the things that we're giving to our
that's-
children.
yeah.
And I've noticed
one of my
that.
biggest regrets and lessons is, like, giving so much of myself into these relationships, and I've got to stop guilting myself over that because they were the wrong men and they were taking. I took away from my kids. you know, and so that's a big lesson where it's like, all right, you got to be intentional and also cognizant of that, like moving forward. And that's why I talked about, you know, earlier, like the relationship I do find by myself, I do well for myself and my 3 kids, but the next relationship has to make my life better, you know?
Yes.
Like, I don't want to be stagnant. I want you to truly be able to make my life better. And it's, you know, it's a partnership. So it's going to be give and take with 50-50. If you're just taking from me, we can't do that. Like, it's got to be a balance there. So, yeah.
That makes sense. Well, you can tell you're like, you know, reflecting and doing the work that has to be done because, you know, there's a whole industry, really booming billion-dollar industry kind of on self-help and
I know.
reflecting and how to break patterns.
Yeah.
And, but I think it will just kind of happen naturally.
It has to be intentional.
Yeah.
There's all the books out there that tell you, like, be aware of this. But, like, have that in your mind, but also, like, how are you going to apply that to your life?
Definitely. And your intuition and paying attention
Girl.
to the signs and necessary. Like,
if I know one thing, like, from now on, like, listen to my intuition. It has always been right. And I'm just like, oh, okay. And then the universe comes back like Mike Tyson. They're like, I told you.
But, you know, we all love, right? And
I know.
when it's easy
I
to
love hard.
You love hard and
Love hard.
It makes sense. And maybe somebody who lives in the same state as you. I mean, it could be just a little bit easier with availability.
This state is so small.
It is.
You
Minnesota
know that.
is small.
Everybody knows everybody, and everybody's tapped into. It's so so.
Yeah, and maybe it's too not focusing on, which I don't think you are right now anyway, of like even being in a relationship, just kind of focusing on yourself and your kids.
Focusing on myself, but also
and then it
get
happens.
Out there, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to be a prisoner to this situation for too long, because I can reflect and heal while having some fun.
Of course, right? We're outside this summer, so that is important.
I'm trying.
Well, it kind of goes, I mean, we've talked a little bit about like reflections and even like what comes next, which is, right, being outside and putting yourself out there. And I always think of too of even the decisions that we make. I always curious, like, how do our kids see it?
Right.
And like being intentional about the things that we do just based on how we live our lives, right, and present ourselves to the world. Our kids pay attention to that, and it'll reflect how they kind of navigate in this world.
Yeah.
And like, it's kind of a big responsibility, right, for us to be thinking of them and doing all the right things. But I just always think of that of like, gosh, if our kids now could tell us like what they see, what would that be, right? And then
my kids are very intuitive, and they pick up on they are me, and it's crazy. Like, we have a very good communicative relationship where they're very transparent, and I will say my daughter is she's nosy, but she knows everything, and she knows her mama, and so she ultimately found out about, you know, the 2 relationships, and because she was just so excited for me. Like, it's crazy where I remember talking to them about me getting back out in the dating field. Like, what would that look like? How would you feel? Like, you know, mommy and daddy we're always going to be mommy and daddy. But, you know, and so my daughter ultimately found out about, you know, C. And I remember her being so sad because she was so excited to, like, meet him, and kept being like, can I meet him one day? Like, how do we figure out, maybe I'll work with him on your birthday? You know, like, she's just so thoughtful. Sweet. And yeah. And I was very protective of my kids. Like, I'm always protective. I'm like, I don't want you, because they are empaths, and like, they love. They love people, as long as, you know, you treat them with kindness and respect. If you're in with their mom, like, they'll get to know you, and they'll forever be, you know, ask about you, or they remember people from like 3-4 years. What? And so I'm very intentional and aware of like who I bring into their lives. And I knew that I didn't, unless it was like we were moving forward to, we had talked about marriage, that once that had happened and like we were knew that that was going to be the next step, that's, there's all these like guidelines, but for me it was like my heart had to feel right about it, because those are my precious jewels. And so Naomi had found out about it, and she was just so sad. And I remember Zave being like, he just kept looking at me. And then I think one day they were like, when I talk about taking away from my kids, like you try to be aware of, like you compartmentalize. So when they would go to sleep, but also your mind is just kind of racing and replaying your relationship. And I'm trying to be there for my kids, but also trying to be, like not suppress my emotions. But so it's a really fucked up situation to be in. And the kids one day were just like, you know what you should do? You should go shower. You should get dressed. You should put some makeup on and do your hair and like go out with your girl. Like they were just like, that will make you feel better. And so that, it hurt me to know that they knew that I was in that much pain, but like to know that they were trying to resolve or, help me to move forward. That's the part where I just like, it kills the most that like my kids were affected by that, but they were also being supportive and, trying to be tough for their mama. And so for me, like moving forward and reflecting on the past, like I want to make sure that if I'm in a relationship, it is not taking away from my kids. It's enhancing their life. And this last relationship wasn't toxic. Like it wasn't, the gaslight, obviously it was the gaslighting, but it wasn't like tumultuous. And so I was truly able to be present for my kids. And I think the part that hurts the most is that the time that I took away from my kids spending with that person, I can't get that back, but I have to be conscious and aware moving forward of the people that I'm investing my time and energy and emotions into, so that it is truly right, like checking in, making sure that they're emotionally mature, emotionally intelligent, healed spiritually, like they have the presence of mind to know when they're right and wrong, and ultimately like just having we're on the same path, right?
Yeah.
And so I want to make sure that moving forward there are no red flags, and so not saying like there are no major red flags, because emotional intelligence, emotional immaturity, like those are big, and that they're grown ass age. If I'm putting in the work for myself, like if you aren't capable of getting yourself to a place where you're truly able to enjoy life and embody all of the ups and downs of life, I can't have it, and walking into that next relationship with boundaries and also being my authentic self. So I'd never want to take away from my kids again, but I also never want to put into a relationship more than I'm getting out of it.
Yeah, I think that's probably key.
Yeah.
You can't, it's got to feel like a partnership. And, I don't know that anybody you meet, right, is going to have all of those things, right? Because people grow, and it's something that
and
you
can
grow
together,
right?
So I think for me, like, we were growing together, the last one. But the red flags kept red flagging, and then they would get, like, more intense. And then I would throw myself in more and more and be like, how do we get you help? But there's got to be, like, the big, there can't be, like, major red flags where I got to listen to myself. Like, when I was like, I'm going to walk out, I got to walk away and, like, stick to that and not allow myself to be seduced into, communicating more, coming back because they're being consistent, So, yeah.
Oh, that makes sense. That leads me
Did
to
that
a
make
question
sense?
that just brings up, because you have a daughter. Do you think that it's also like really critical for kind of Naomi to seeing you also really happy and thriving and all those things all by yourself as well, even aside from being in a relationship? Because, you know, when you think of, there's some people, you know, I'm not even thinking of myself, but just even when I idolized what we think a perfect marriage should be like, right? What we see on TV, right? You think that relationships are like what you see in the movies and they're perfect all the time, and right? And it's not like that, right? Relationship people are complicated, and you're bringing two complicated people together. So relationships it's ups and downs. It takes a lot of work, right? And so I always just even think for my daughters to know too, it's okay to also be by yourself. Like, a relationship is not the only thing that's going to even fulfill you, right? Because even as you know, being married, your partner can't be everything for you.
Right.
Right. You have to kind of have that happiness too, and the things that you enjoy outside of that relationship and within it to make it whole. Because another person can just not do that for you. So I just always think of what are the ensuring that our girls also kind of make sure they get their self-worth from themselves as well.
Observation, and so she sees me and she sees that, like, I am successful, I'm flourishing. You know, she talks about my wardrobe and my shoes, and so she mimics a lot of the things that I do, and so I'm very conscious about, like, what I present to her as she is starting to build her own self-confidence. And so now she, you know, she repeats things like, you feel good, you look good, you feel good. Or, you know, and so she's like, I'm aware of, like, how I present myself to the world. And we do affirmations every morning. And so I want her to be confident within herself first and foremost. And so I think she'll take that confidence and she'll be more selective with the, not just like even in a romantic relationship, like the platonic or girlfriend relationships, she'll be more selective with the people that she allows into her circle. And she'll be more confident with that and not just like being railroaded by life in general. And I know and I respect like your observation or perspective on you don't need a man, you don't need a partner. Totally agree with that, especially if you're not getting anything out of it, right? You don't want to be with somebody that's just sucking the life and sucking the energy out of you, but you want to be smart about what you attract and the people that you bring in your life. So that starts with confidence first, and that starts with self-love. And so I want to start that now, as opposed to me at 30s and 40s, you know, where it's like now I'm being aware, conscious of the energy that I bring and, like, you know, the enabling and the attractions and things like that. So I want to start her young, and also my boys, you know, work on, you know, seeing a successful woman and not having these Kevin Samuels mindsets and things like that, you know, and being respectful of women and being respectful of yourself and like what you put out there into the world and who you attract. So
yeah. Well, I mean, the great thing is you are a perfect example of that, of being, you know, successful and how you present yourself to the world. And, you know, you are so compassionate and kind. And we know, right? You're fashionable. So you're kids. So, I mean, I think it's even good. I feel like your boys, right, are going to be looking for someone who has similar attributes to their mom. So I think they're going to be fine. And my whole thought with that too isn't that, of course, I want my girls to, like, you know, get married and find their partner. I just important for them to know too, just like the self-love, to not just choose anybody. Just to have somebody.
You have to be okay with being by yourself. You have to be okay with, like, you're keeping your own company, because I think that's the first love. Because a lot of people get into relationships thinking that it's going to fix something, and I'm learning that about myself. It was like, oh, it's gonna make me happy, it's, you know, like I just need that. And so it's like I did a lot of work where it's like, I'm okay. I love myself. I'm okay with my own company. You know that. Like, I'll cancel plans with the quickness. Like, I'm just going to chill by myself. But being okay with being by yourself and loving your own company is first and foremost, like, the biggest priority, because relationships are not the end all be all. They don't fix everything, especially if that relationship is on rocky grounds, because there are people that are in relationships that are lonely, right? And they get into those relationships because they're lonely first, and then you can be lonely with somebody else. And so I don't want that to be just this expectation of society and, like, being with somebody just for the purpose of being with them. Like, be okay with being by yourself first and loving that self, and then you'll attract I want grandbabies.
Yes, don't we
Yes.
all? Even though it's even hard to think about that. I know a long time from now, since our kids are still little. But I mean, just the fact of all the self-reflection that you've been doing. And it's always like you'll make different choices because you're more kind of conscious of kind of the things that worked well or didn't work well in the past for kind of all of us. And I mean, there's lots of lessons that all of from being married, and you used to be married, and life and relationships are complicated, and people are complicated, right? And so, and you change. Let's always think of too of you're not the same person that you were.
Every decade that I look back, I'm like, you're still here.
Right, and you were like 10 years ago, you're a completely different person than you are today, and the things that you care about and your priorities.
For growth in life.
So I can't think of more. Do you have any?
I don't know, girl. You have been a blessing for the last 3.5 years. I appreciate you and your friendship, and your, like, cutthroat sometimes. Like, you better make sure you got your hair done, girl. Get outside. You better be going out tonight, and I'd be all sad. And she's just like, you better make sure you go out tonight. So.
Oh, well, I love you, and you are one of my favorite people, and I, of course, want you to kind of find love, and yes, be outside, since I be in the house with my kids.
I know, I gotta.
With them being still young, but hey, you also kind of get me outside and kind of doing things, and I'm glad that you're doing this podcast and kind of exploring the different.
It's been a 1.5 years in the making. I can't believe I finally pulled the trigger.
And then your book will come out, and once that comes out, we can really dive into some of the ins and outs about this relationships, because there's whole podcast episodes that we can go on for days about some of the experiences that you have gone through that are very kind of unique. So no, thanks for having me.
I love you. Thank you so much. All right, this is A Dose of CoCo with Amenah, and I'm just excited that you guys are here and that you were able to join me today. We got a little weekend ahead of us, so we're going to head out, and thank you so much.